Welcome to Patterns in Application Design. I'm your instructor, Cameron Buckley. Although the class may be taught by someone else, I've created the content for this course. And let's just jump into what exactly this class is. So this class, Patterns in Application Design, is an advanced course for people in the Digital Innovations program. And specifically, it's a focus on application development and design for iOS or Android devices. You're going to learn how to take designs from Adobe XD and translate them into usable application prototypes in Xcode or Android Studio. You're going to basically learn how to do things like programming on a very basic level, how to implement a prototype from one program to another, how to create mock-ups, and then also how to create finalized, finished applications. The goal for this class is not to turn you into a professional app developer, but rather introduce you to the idea of how to rapidly prototype ideas, get them into an app, and then test it out and send it to a user. So again, not a computer science class. However, something that's really important, and the reason this video exists, is that there are two different tracks in this class that are dependent largely on the hardware that you have at your house, meaning what kind of computer do you have. What do I mean by tracks? I mean that there is an Apple or an iOS development track and there is an Android development track, okay? Now, you may have an Apple device, you may have an Android device. That doesn't matter. The device that you own as far as your phone doesn't matter for this class. You're going to be able to run what's called a simulator and use that to check out your application and test things. So you don't need a phone. What's important here is the computer that you have. Do you have a Mac Apple computer, or do you have a Windows or Linux computer? Okay? One side, on the left-hand side, if you have an Apple computer, you can develop for iOS devices. Okay? You can develop for Android devices. It doesn't matter. You can choose either one and it will work. Okay? In the class, you're going to see that there's Module 1 iOS and Module 1 Android. That's saying, am I developing for an iOS device or am I developing for an Android device? Now, if you're on Windows, you can only develop for Android devices. You cannot develop for iOS devices on a Mac, on Windows, or on Linux, I should say. So Windows and Linux users, you're stuck with Android. Okay, that's the only thing you can develop for. Even if you own an iPhone, that's what you can develop for. Those of you with Mac computers, you can develop for iOS. Okay, so just to clarify, you can develop for iOS and Android, I guess, to clarify further. So I want to make it clear that this is not, for example, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. It's totally fine to have either devices, to work with either platforms. And if you're really engaged with this stuff, do both tracks. Both tracks are going to learn the same content. The languages, one language, Swift, which is what we use for iOS design, is extremely similar to Kotlin, which is what we use for Android development, or which is basically Java. So Kotlin and Swift, extremely similar languages, not a huge amount of difference. So the programming principles that you're going to learn will apply to really any language. You could apply them to C++ or C# or something else outside of this class. This is just basic principal interests. But the design element and like how to use the integrated development environment, meaning Xcode or Android Studio. Xcode is what's used on iOS devices, and Android Studio is what's used for Android devices. These are very similar as well, but there are a few key differences. As far as like lecture content goes, and theoretical content and conceptual content, that is exactly the same across the board. You should not feel like you have a detriment because you're using one device over another. So just to clarify one more time, we have these tracks. We have an Apple track and we have an Android track. You don't have to do both. You choose one or the other. If you own a Mac device, you can develop for iOS devices. You can develop for Android devices. If you own a Windows or Linux device, you can't develop for iOS devices. You can only use the Android path. If you have any questions about this, feel free to email me or shoot your instructor a message.